He was hiding in a hole, not training, not sharpening anything, not even praying. Hiding, crouched in a winepress, trying to thresh wheat underground where no one could spot him. Because out in the open, the enemy took everything, every harvest, every season. For 7 years straight, they had swept through this land like a plague and left nothing behind. And while this man was crouching in that pit, scared, invisible, doing a farmer's job in a farmer's hole, God walked over to the tree nearby, sat down, looked directly at him, and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Not what he would become someday, not a prophecy about his future potential. Right now, while he was still shaking in the dirt with nothing impressive to show for himself. That is the most important scene in the entire book of Judges. And once you understand why God said it, not in spite of where this man was hiding, but directly to him in that exact state, you will never read this book the same way again. But to feel what that actually means, you have to go back, because Judges doesn't begin with Gideon in a hole. It begins much earlier, with something quieter and far more dangerous, a series of small, reasonable-sounding decisions made by an entire nation that should have known better. They didn't. When Joshua dies, Israel is standing at the edge of everything God had promised them. The land is theirs. The instruction had been clear, stated so many times there was no room to misread it. Drive out every nation in Canaan, every single one. Not because God was careless with life, but because he understood something Israel apparently didn't. What you tolerate long enough, you eventually become. These nations would stay, their gods would stay, their worship structures, their family arrangements, the slow cultural gravity of living alongside something you were supposed to remove. It wouldn't conquer Israel through open warfare, it would absorb them, through familiarity, through the nearness of it, through the quiet, nearly invisible erosion of what's one small compromise actually going to cost me. But Israel looked at the Canaanites still in the land and ran a calculation. Some cities had iron chariots, some tribes were formidable, so tribe by tribe, the same quiet decision kept getting made. Let them stay, put them to work, they're useful. Judges 1 reads like an avalanche that takes years to notice. Manasseh didn't drive them out, Ephraim didn't drive them out. Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, same story, one after another, until you're watching an entire nation, one concession at a time, slowly becoming the thing they were supposed to replace. The Danites couldn't even hold their own territory. They got pushed back into the hill country by the Amorites, who didn't want them there. Israel had been given the land. They simply couldn't bring themselves to take it. Then Judges 2:10 arrives, one verse, and it lands like a stone. A generation arose after Joshua who did not know the Lord or the work he had done for Israel. One generation, that's all it took. So the cycle starts. Israel abandons God. Protection withdraws. An oppressor rises. The suffering becomes unbearable. They cry out. God sends a deliverer, a judge, and they're rescued. The judge dies, the whole machine resets, and then it happens again and again for roughly 350 years. Not a clean spiral downward, more like a wheel that never fully stops, just grinding through the same grooves, the water never quite draining clean. The first judge God raises is Othniel, clean, right lineage, proven warrior, Caleb's own nephew. God's spirit falls on him, he defeats the king of Mesopotamia, and the land rests for 40 years. Orderly, almost too simple for a book that is about to become anything but. Before the next major judge, though, the text pauses on a man most people walk right past, Shamgar. One verse, Judges 3:31. He killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, a farm tool, a stick used to prod cattle. 600 men with a stick. The Bible records this with almost no ceremony, like a footnote wedged between larger stories. But that one verse is the first clear statement of what this entire book is actually building toward. God's specific preference for the wrong instrument in the wrong hands, producing an outcome that simply cannot be explained any other way. That thread starts with Shamgar. It never stops. Then Ehud. Eglon of Moab forms an alliance, presses into Israel's territory, takes Jericho, and holds it for 18 years. Not a rough patch. 18 years is an entire childhood lived under the weight of foreign occupation. When God raises a deliverer, the first thing we learn about him is that he's left-handed. That is not an odd biographical footnote, that is the whole setup. In that military culture, guards searched the left hip when checking travelers for weapons, because right-handed men drew from the left. A left-handed fighter kept his blade on the right thigh, the side no one thought to check. Ehud understands exactly what he has. He crafts a short double-edged sword, about 18 inches, and straps it to his right thigh beneath his clothing, invisible to any standard inspection. He secures an audience with Eglon. The text notes, without apology, that Eglon was a very fat man. That detail isn't editorializing, it's going somewhere. Ehud delivers the tribute Israel has been forced to pay, dismisses his delegation, then turns back and tells the king he has a private message from God. Eglon sends every servant out, just him and Ehud in the upper chamber, alone. Ehud says, "I have a message from God for you." Then he draws with his left hand, drives the blade into the king's abdomen. Eglon is so large the sword disappears entirely, the fat closes over handle and all. Ehud locks the chamber from the inside and slips out through the vestibule. The servants wait outside, assuming their king is using the private room. The text implies this with dry precision. And by the time they finally work up the nerve to open the locked door, Ehud is long gone. Israel's forces are assembled, and 80 years of peace follow. 80 years. God's first two deliverances in Judges, a clean, textbook military leader, and a left-handed assassin with a hidden blade and nerves cold enough to sit across from a king, tell him calmly that he has a word from God, and follow through. This is not the version of rescue anyone would have designed in advance. After Ehud comes Deborah, and what unfolds here should unsettle anyone who thought they had God's selection criteria figured out. Israel falls back into the pattern. For 20 years, the Canaanites under King Jabin have been pressing them into the ground. His military commander, Sisera, runs 900 iron chariots. In the ancient world, 900 iron chariots wasn't just a tactical edge, it was a declaration about who gets to determine the outcome before anyone even draws a weapon. Deborah is serving as prophet and judge. She sends her a commander named Barak and delivers the word directly. Take 10,000 men to Mount Tabor. God will draw Sisera out and put him in your hands. Barak's response is Judges 4:8. If you go with me, I'll go. But if you won't go with me, I won't go. This man just received a direct divine mandate with a promised outcome, and he's adding a condition. He'll obey, but only with the prophet physically beside him as a safety net. Deborah agrees to go, but she attaches something to the arrangement. The honor of this victory will not belong to you. God is going to give Sisera into the hand of a woman. Barak apparently finds that reasonable, which tells you something about exactly what he was fighting for. The battle unfolds. God throws Sisera's entire army into confusion. 900 iron chariots, routed. Sisera bolts on foot from his own chariot, the most feared military commander in the region, abandoning his own vehicle mid-battle and running. He makes it to the tent of Heber the Kenite, peace arrangement between his clan and his king. He assumes he's safe. She welcomes him, gives him milk when he asked for water, covers him with a blanket. He tells her to stand guard and deny his presence to anyone who comes looking. She agrees. He sleeps. She picks up a tent peg and a hammer. Judges 4:21 does not soften what comes next. When Barak arrives, still in pursuit, Jael steps out to meet him. "Come, I'll show you the man you're looking for." The defining act of this entire military campaign, the moment that gets its own chapter of poetry in Judges 5, one of the oldest pieces of Hebrew literature in existence, belongs to a woman with a hammer who held no rank, no title, no place in any military command structure at all. She saw the moment, she acted. When the appointed person won't move, God doesn't pause the plan. He reassigns the moment to whoever is willing. Deborah's victory song names the tribes that didn't come. Reuben stayed with his sheep. Dan sat by his ships. Asher remained on the coast. They weren't condemned with fury or dramatic judgment. They were simply noted, absent from the moment, written out of the song. Then comes Gideon, and this is where the book stops being careful. 7 years of Midianite raids have reduced Israel to a nation of cave dwellers. These aren't occupiers running a government. They sweep through every harvest season, strip everything that can be carried, and vanish before anyone can organize a response. Israel isn't just oppressed, they're being systematically starved into total submission. And God goes to a winepress. Gideon is there, threshing wheat underground where the Midianites can't see him. You need an open, elevated threshing floor for wheat. The wind has to carry the chaff away. A winepress is enclosed and hidden, completely wrong for the task, but hidden is the only thing that matters right now. The angel of the Lord sits under an oak nearby. looks at the man in the hole, and says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Watch what Gideon does. He doesn't perform religious gratitude. He doesn't bow his head. He pushes back immediately. If God is with us, where are the miracles our fathers told us about? God has abandoned us. That's his first response. Not theater, not disrespect for effect. He is a man who has been living inside this reality for 7 years, and he is saying out loud the thing he has been carrying the entire time. God's response doesn't address the complaint, doesn't revisit the cause, doesn't explain the theology. He just says, "Go in the strength you have. Am I not sending you?" Gideon pushes back again. His clan is the weakest in Manasseh. He is the least in his family. Not false modesty, honest inventory. He is at the absolute bottom of every relevant social measure. Exactly who God picks. He asks for a sign, prepares a meal, bread, broth, and meat. The angel touches the offering with a staff. Fire rises from the rock. Everything is consumed, and the messenger is gone. Gideon panics, convinced he's about to die for having seen God face to face. God says, "Peace, you're not going to die." Then comes the test before the real mission. God tells him to tear down the Baal altar his own father maintains in the village, cut down the Asherah pole beside it, build a proper altar to the Lord, and sacrifice the bull using the wood from the pole he just destroyed. He does it at night because he's afraid of what the village will do if they catch him doing it in daylight. The town wakes up, finds the shrine destroyed, tracks it to Gideon, and arrives at his father's house demanding execution. His father, the man whose altar it was, stops everything cold. If Baal is really a god, let him defend himself against the man who destroyed his altar. Why are you fighting Baal's battles for him? They give Gideon a new name, Jerubbaal. Let Baal contend with him. The idol couldn't produce a single response when handed the opportunity to defend itself in public. Now the coalition forms below. Midianites, Amalekites, Eastern peoples, a force so vast the Bible compares them to locusts for sheer number, their camels like sand on the seashore. The Spirit of the Lord falls on Gideon. He blows a trumpet. 32,000 men respond, and God says, "Too many." Sit with that for a moment. Outmatched, cave-dwelling, harvest-stripped Israel shows up with too many men for God to work with. The reasoning is in Judges 7:2. If they win with this many, they'll say their own hand saved them. The victory has to be so obviously outside human capacity that no one can spin it as military strategy or national strength. Whoever is afraid can go home. 22,000 leave. 10,000 remain. Still too many. God tells Gideon to watch how the men drink from a stream. Most drop to their knees, faces to the water, drinking directly from the stream. 300 stay upright, cupping water to their mouths with their hands while their eyes keep scanning the horizon. Those 300. 300 men against an army compared to locusts for size. The battle plan God gives them: trumpets, empty clay jars, torches hidden inside the jars. Surround the enemy camp at night. On signal, shatter the jars simultaneously. Lift the torches high. Blow the horns. Shout. That is the complete strategy. There is no other part. Judges 7:19, 300 jars shatter in the darkness at once. 300 torches blaze out of nowhere simultaneously. 300 trumpets. One shout, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. The Midianite camp erupts in confusion. Men in the dark turn on each other. They flood outward in every direction, routing into the night. An army that spent 7 years systematically dismantling an entire nation, destroyed in one dark hour by clay pots and fire. God engineered the army down to 300 for one reason only, so that when it was over, the only explanation left standing would be him. The numbers would simply refuse to support any other conclusion. But Gideon's story doesn't end at the victory. That's where most people close the chapter. They shouldn't. After the Midianites are routed, Israel tries to make him king. He refuses. God will rule over you, not me. That sounds like a man who actually absorbed something. But then he collects gold earrings from the plunder, melts them down, and makes an ephod, a priestly garment, which he installs in his hometown of Ophrah. Judges 8:27 says all Israel went after it, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Think about that. the man who demolished his father's Baal altar, who challenged the idol to defend itself, who stripped his own army to 300 men so God alone would receive the credit. That man ends his story by quietly constructing a new object of false worship, not through dramatic rebellion, quietly, out of gold collected from a victory God gave him. He had 70 sons from many wives, and a concubine in Shechem gave him one more. His name was Abimelech. If Gideon is a complicated hero, Abimelech is something colder, a study in what happens when someone tries to seize through violence what God gives through calling. He goes to Shechem, works his connection through his mother's family, receives 70 pieces of silver from the temple of Baal, the very Baal his father once fought against, hires reckless men with the money, and murders 70 of his brothers on a single stone. Gideon's sons, 1 stone, all but the youngest. Jotham escapes by hiding. Then he climbs Mount Gerizim and delivers one of the sharpest political parables in the Old Testament. The trees want a king. The olive tree declines, too busy making oil. The fig says no, too busy making figs. The vine says no, too occupied producing wine that brings joy to people. Then they go to the thorn bush. The thorn bush says yes, enthusiastically. Come take shelter in my shade. A thorn bush, with no shade to offer anyone. Every tree with something real to give refused the offer because they were occupied with their actual work. The desperate lunge for power came from the one with nothing substantive to contribute. Jotham says this, then runs. Abimelech rules 3 years. God sends a spirit of discord between him and the men of Shechem, and the whole alliance collapses from the inside out. Battles follow, sieges. He reaches the tower of Thebes and gets to the door, and a woman on the roof drops an upper millstone on his skull. He calls his armor-bearer immediately. Run me with the sword. Don't let them say a woman killed me. The sword goes in. Judges 9:54 still records it. A woman through the millstone. You can attempt to manage the story. The text is not always cooperative with that effort. The minor judges come and go. Tola, Jair, then later Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, brief intervals recorded without ceremony, short breaths between larger catastrophes. Then Israel spirals again, and this time it isn't subtle. They're serving the gods of 7 surrounding nations simultaneously. When they cry out to God, he says something that has never appeared before in this book. Go to the gods you've been chasing. Let them save you. It isn't cruelty. It's the grief of someone taken for granted too many times, finally drawing a line. But Israel does something different this time. They actually put the foreign gods away. They mean it. And Judges 10:16 says something that catches you off guard. God's soul grew impatient over their misery. He couldn't keep watching. The judge he raises from this moment is Jephthah, son of Gilead and a prostitute. His half-brothers expelled him the moment they were old enough to do the math on inheritance. You're another woman's son. You don't belong here. He ends up in the territory of Tob, gathering men around him, building something from the outside edge. An outcast, running a company of other outcasts. When Ammon attacks and Israel has no one capable of leading, the elders of Gilead travel to find the man they threw away.
Jephthah doesn't pretend the history didn't happen. He names it directly. You hated me and drove me from my father's house, and now you're here because you're desperate. He negotiates every term before agreeing to move. He has already learned at great personal cost what happens when you trust goodwill without something binding it in place. Before the battle, he makes a vow. If God gives him victory over Ammon, whatever comes out of his house first to meet him on his return, he will offer it as a burnt offering. He wins. He comes home. His daughter comes out first, dancing, tambourines, celebrating her father's impossible return. He tears his clothes. She doesn't plead for her life. She asks for 2 months in the mountains with her friends, not to mourn a husband she'll never have, but a whole life she won't get to live. She goes. She comes back, and Jephthah carries out his vow. The devastating truth buried underneath that grief is this. God's spirit had already moved in Jephthah before the vow was spoken. The victory was already on its way. He didn't need to add anything. But he was afraid that grace wouldn't hold on its own, that he needed to purchase what was already being given freely. He tried to bargain for what was already promised. You cannot out-offer grace, and the attempt sometimes costs you what cannot be returned. What follows is a brutal civil war with Ephraim. 42,000 men dead at the Jordan fords because they mispronounced a single word, shibboleth. They said sibboleth, a password, and everything it cost. An entire war over wounded pride ended by an inability to say a word correctly. Then Samson. Before we go there, something has to be said clearly. The version most people carry isn't the man on the page. The familiar picture is a noble, powerful hero who gets tragically deceived by a manipulative woman. The Samson in Judges is something far more honest and far harder to look at than that. He was set apart before birth. An angel appears to his mother before his conception. He'll be a Nazirite from the womb. No wine, no great products, no razor, no contact with anything dead. And the stated purpose in Judges 13:5 is that he would begin to save Israel from the Philistines. Begin. Not complete, not finish, begin. Hold that word, it matters. His first scene as an adult, he sees a Philistine woman and tells his parents to get her for him. She pleases him. They push back. Are there no Israelite women? He repeats himself without modification. Get her for me. The phrase he uses, right in my eyes, is the exact language the final sentence of this entire book uses to describe a nation that has lost all moral direction. The consecrated deliverer is already speaking the vocabulary of the people he was sent against before his story even properly starts. On the way to see her, a lion attacks. The Spirit of the Lord comes on him and he tears it apart with bare hands. He tells nobody. On a later trip, he finds bees have nested in the carcass, honey living inside something dead, and he eats it, feeds some to his parents, says nothing about where it came from. He has now broken the Nazirite code against contact with what is dead. He is still called. The Spirit still moves through him. God keeps working through material that is openly, visibly compromised. This book will not let you miss that. He turns the lion into a riddle at his wedding feast. The Philistine guests threaten his bride until she extracts the answer through 7 days of relentless weeping. She tells them, he kills 30 men in Ashkelon to pay the debt in clothing, returns furious, and his wife gets handed to his best man. His response to that? 300 foxes tied in pairs at the tail, with a torch between each pair, released through every grain field, vineyard, and olive grove the Philistines own. Everything burns. They retaliate by burning his wife and her father. He retaliates harder. 3,000 men from his own tribe come to hand him over just to keep the peace. He lets them bind him, walks out calmly, breaks the ropes the moment the Spirit hits, grabs the jawbone of a dead donkey, dead, Nazirite code again, not for the first time, and kills 1,000 men with it. The Spirit of God working through a man who keeps casually dismantling the terms of his own consecration.
Then Delilah, the Philistine lords each offer her 1,100 pieces of silver to discover the source of his strength. She asks him directly. He lies. The trap fails. She asks again. Different lie. Same result. Third time. Same pattern. Here is what gets missed in every retelling. Samson knows. He is not being deceived. He finds the proximity to being caught genuinely entertaining. The edge of danger is part of why he stays. But Delilah doesn't stop. Day after day, the Bible says, she pressed him until his soul was vexed to death. Not a dramatic confrontation, just relentless, grinding pressure, day after day, until he had nothing left to protect himself with. And he tells her the truth. The hair is the covenant, the last visible sign of the vow he has been chipping away his entire life. When it goes, the covenant breaks. He'll be alone, running on his own strength, which has never actually been his. She shaves his head while he sleeps. He wakes. The Philistines are there. He rises to do what he's always done. Judges 16:20. He did not know that the Lord had departed from him. He reached for what had always been there and came up with nothing. He didn't feel it leave. He didn't notice when it went quiet. They blind him, chain him in bronze, bring him to Gaza, the same city he once humiliated by carrying its gate up a hill on his shoulders as a statement, and put him to work grinding grain in prison. The man who tore a lion apart with bare hands doing the lowest labor that exists. Judges 16:22, his hair begins to grow back. They bring him out to the temple of Dagon for the great festival. 3,000 people packed onto the roof watching the broken, blind former terror perform for their entertainment. He asks the boy guiding him to place his hands on the two central support pillars. "I need something to lean on." The boy does it. Samson prays. The first genuine, unprompted prayer in his entire life. No claim on his consecration, no recounting of what he's done for God, no theological argument, just this. Judges 16:28. "Lord God, remember me. Please strengthen me just this one time." That's the whole prayer. God hears it. He pushes. The pillars shift. The roof collapses. Judges 16:30. The dead he killed in that single moment were more than all he killed during his entire life combined. More destruction in one blind, broken instant of asking than in all his years of clear-eyed, covenant-breaking self-reliance. And now, that word from the beginning makes complete sense. Begin. Samson wasn't positioned to finish the work against Philistia. He was the crack in the door. His specific chaos, his specific recklessness, his specific pride, every bit of it placed him in the one location where a single desperate prayer could do what no organized military campaign could have ever reached. A disciplined, covenant-keeping soldier would never have ended up chained in that temple, surrounded by 3,000 enemies. Only Samson's particular wreckage put him exactly there. The mess wasn't incidental to the outcome. The mess was the mechanism. The last 5 chapters of Judges don't offer recovery. No judge rises, no divine appointment arrives. A man named Micah in Ephraim steals silver from his own mother, confesses when he hears her publicly curse the thief, and watches her take the returned money and pour it into carved idols for their household shrine. He sets up a private religious system, installs one of his sons as priest, and eventually upgrades to a wandering Levite who passes through. He tells himself in Judges 17:13 that God will prosper him now because he finally has a real Levite for a priest. He has built an entire private religion from stolen money and personal invention, dressed it in the language of divine blessing, and convinced himself the arrangement is sacred. 600 Danites come through looking for new territory, not because God failed to give them land, but because they never actually went and claimed what was theirs. They discover Micah's setup, take the idols, recruit the Levite with the practical argument that a whole tribe is a better opportunity than one man's household. The priest goes without visible conflict. The idols get installed in Dan and worshipped there for generations. Micah chases them down the road, is told plainly that 600 armed men aren't going to argue with him, and turns around and goes home.
There's nothing else to do. This section isn't dramatic. It's quiet and domestic, almost mundane. That's exactly what makes it frightening. Faith dismantled piece by piece into personal convenience until what's left isn't worship at all. It's preference swearing religious language, a God custom-fitted to whatever arrangement suited the one who built it. And then, Judges 19. A Levite's concubine leaves him and returns to her father's house in Bethlehem. He comes for her after 4 months. Hospitality flows back and forth. They finally leave. Evening falls in Gibeah of Benjamin. No one in the town offers them lodging. An old man from Ephraim finds them sitting in the square and takes them in. That night, men of the city surround the house. They want the Levite. The Levite pushes his concubine out the door. She is found in the morning, collapsed at the threshold, her hands reaching toward the door. He tells her to get up. She doesn't answer. He puts her on the donkey, takes her home, cuts her body into 12 pieces, and sends one to every tribe of Israel. The text records this without commentary, without softening, without editorial distance. The horror sits on the page exactly as it happened. The civil war that follows nearly removes Benjamin from existence. 36,000 Israelites die in the first 2 battles before God gives them the victory. The tribe of Benjamin, warriors once described as so precise they could sling a stone at a hair and not miss, reduced to 600 men hiding in the rocks of the wilderness. Then Israel realizes they've sworn not to give their daughters to Benjamin in marriage. But without wives, Benjamin can't survive as a tribe. So they look for a loophole. Jabesh-Gilead didn't join the assembly, so they never took the oath. They killed the men and married women of Jabesh-Gilead and take 400 surviving virgins for the Benjaminites. Not enough. They authorize the Benjaminites to ambush the young women of Shiloh during the annual festival and take them by force. Take them. And Israel's leadership doesn't just permit it, they rationalize it. We technically didn't give our daughters. They took them. So the oath remains technically intact. In the careful work of preserving their oath, they cannot see that they've sanctioned mass abduction. That's what happens to moral reasoning when the center is gone. It doesn't collapse in a single dramatic moment. It bends further, bends again, until one day you are explaining why an ambush in a vineyard is actually a form of faithfulness to your principles, and you believe it. Judges 21:25, the last sentence of the book. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Not a rallying cry, not a forward-pointing hope, a diagnosis. Everything that came before, 7 cycles, every broken deliverer, every staggering rescue, and every collapse, compressed into one quiet, clinical sentence about what happens when every person becomes their own final moral authority. Not overnight, not through one catastrophic choice, gradually, across enough generations that no single person can be blamed for the whole drift. But before you close the book, go back. Go back to every person God chose in it. The left-handed man with a blade no guard ever thought to search for. The woman who grabbed a tent peg when the general who was supposed to move wouldn't. The man crouching in a winepress, called a warrior while he was still hiding before he had done a single warrior thing. The outcast recruited by the exact community that had expelled him. The reckless, vow-breaking man whose blind, desperate, barely articulate prayer in a collapsing temple accomplished more than his entire lifetime of clear-eyed strength combined. God didn't clean any of them up first, not one. He didn't wait for Gideon to stop being afraid, didn't wait for Jephthah to heal from what his own family did to him, didn't wait for Samson to finally pull himself together. He worked with exactly what they were, uncertain, broken, reckless, grieving, because the point was never to put their personal excellence on display. The point was to demonstrate what God could do through the most unlikely raw material available, in ways that couldn't be credited to anyone's polished record or cleaned-up life. Every judge in this book is God's argument against the belief that he only works with people who have it together. So what is it about your specific mess that you've quietly decided makes you the exception to that?